I spend a lot of time wondering why games don't feel as magical today as they once did. And sure, some games still give me that same magical feeling as when I was a kid, but it's so much more rare now than it was back in 2011. When I was a kid, I would spend countless hours on the futon in my attic with my pure, undivided attention on the comedically small screen sitting across from me. And sure, it was summer in Vermont, and boy should I have been outside with my friends, but my dumb baby brain wasn't even capable of thinking about that. If you'd walked up to me in that moment and asked me the year, I would have immediately explained that it's 1775 and I'm orchestrating the American Revolution behind the scenes, and also my name is Connor, and also I'm an assassin. Now that answer is incorrect and it only loosely answers the questions posed, but the point here is that when I was a kid, I got fully immersed in games. When you asked me to recite a story, I could recount it line by line like I was a court stenographer. But nowadays, I find it really hard to immerse myself in a game. I can absolutely still have fun, and some of my favorite games of all time have come out in recent years, but I definitely used to find games more captivating. I know this can be chalked up to the fact that my brain is inherently different now than it was as a 12-year-old, but nowadays I have to force myself into getting into a game by blocking out distractions. I have to really focus on the story, and it takes effort for me to reach the end of a game. Of course, there are a ton of factors at play here, and I plan on making a video exploring why games feel less magical nowadays once I give it some more thought, but today I want to focus in on the biggest culprit in modern gaming: the cutscene. Allow me to explain. True immersion in gaming can come in many forms, but the purest form is environmental. The world design, the characters, the graphics, the sound, they all have to act in tandem to hoodwink you into thinking that you're in this game's world. This is something that many games do amazingly nowadays, and I'd argue that environmental design in games is at an all-time high for many modern titles. But there's another element that has to be well-oiled in order to get the immersion machine running: the narrative. There are tons of ways to tell a story nowadays, but the most common and ingrained vessel of narrative is through the use of dialogue and cutscenes. Now, I want to make it clear that I understand that a cutscene is supposed to be a hard cut followed by a brand new separate scene. Duh, idiot, it's right there in the name. But for this video, I'm considering any break from normal gameplay to present the story through dialogue or something in that vein to be considered a cutscene. So basically, anytime the game rips the controls out of your hand like your older brother and forces you to listen to all the underpaid voice actors saying the hell out of their lines for the next minute or so.
Oh yes, he must be referring to my research into the dragons. Yes, I could use someone to fetch something for me.
Get to the point.
And you better pay attention. Sure, you were just killing dragons and orchestrating a political revolution, but the king who is sitting on his throne has some important stuff to slowly say for the next 90 seconds. And right there is the first problem. The second I'll get to later. In many games, the majority of the story is conveyed during these forced sections of dialogue. I mean, I personally have a terrible habit of skipping through the dialogue by spamming A like I'm trying to respawn in Call of Duty and reading it line by line as fast as my brain will go, but that makes for an even worse experience and it lowers my story retention even more. Plus, reading in video games kinda sucks, but go check out Raz's video on that because he puts it way better than I could ever hope to. Now, I love Skyrim like my firstborn son, but playing through this game as an adult, these forced dialogue sections are one of the least enjoyable parts, second only to Nazim.
You get to the Cloud District very often? Oh, what am I saying? Of course you don't.
And I mean, this is shocking, especially because Bethesda is a studio with great writers, great voice actors, and great stories, but there's just this intrinsic negative to having your attention forced and the pacing defined. There's a stark contrast between this total immersion when you forget you're playing a game and then a cutscene making you stop playing and sit down and watch something. For many of gaming's best, myself included, the first thing I do when a cutscene plays is put the controller down. This is the first step in my attention lapsing. And I don't have the best attention span, but I am perfectly capable of sitting down and engaging with the content most of the time when it's done properly. The problem is, without a need to control the game, I have no need for the controller. It's like putting down your fork when the plate is empty. But when I put the controller down, my mind starts to drift. I know that the next minute or so is just going to be dialogue, so I don't really need to read the lines or watch the poorly animated mouths try unsuccessfully to form words. And before I know it, I have control of my character again, but I don't remember a single word that was just said. Now I have to surmise the updates to the story from just a word or two that I caught, the context clues around me, and maybe the unnecessarily rude comment the quest giver says to you if you go back for more detail. And so cutscenes, rather than pulling you in, cause you to break your immersion and realize that you're playing a game. You go from playing to watching. There's no winning by putting more effort into these cutscenes either. If you render them in real time, you're limited by the game engine and they feel janky and awkward. And if you use a pre-rendered cutscene, they're oddly pixelated and it's an even more jarring break from the gameplay loop. Now there's a reason that video games and movies are so similar and yet so different. You interact with a story in an entirely different way when you're playing a game. And it's kind of unfair because movies are able to utilize a number of different tricks to pull you in that just don't work in the context of a video game, especially because gamers go to video games for an entirely different medium of content altogether. So game studios tend to lock some of the most important parts of the story behind these well-meaning but ultimately boring dialogue sections and cutscenes. And it's a bummer too, because a really well-orchestrated cutscene can be a super powerful narrative driver, but those cutscenes are so few and far between. The majority are just lazy game design. But there is a solution, and many of the smartest game developers have begun to make the shift, but we'll get to that in just a second. Earlier I mentioned there are two main problems with modern cutscenes, and the first, as I just explained, is on the developer's side. But when I was thinking about why these games just don't feel the same as when I was a kid, I came to the realization that I kind of deserve some of the blame too. When I was a kid, even though my brain was almost entirely unable to focus on the majority of tasks, when I played a game, I was absolutely locked in. I was like a guard at Buckingham Palace, the way I'd ignore my mom asking me to do chores, my dad asking me to mow the lawn, my brother screaming in my ear. Absolutely nothing was going to get between me and my Super Mario Galaxy time. There's a reason that if you asked me to describe the map of Elden Ring, I'd go, man, I don't know, it's kind of big. But if you asked me to describe the map of Skyrim, you would think I am a Nordic cartographer. I used to be an absolute weapon when it came to beating video games, and that all kind of changed in 8th grade. Two things changed when I neared my middle school graduation. I got a phone and I built my first PC. The former was the best thing to happen to my social well-being, and the latter was perhaps the worst, but they evened out nicely. However, both of these alleged upgrades to my life would change the way that I play games forever. Two problems quickly arose, the first being that I would spend any moment of downtime on my phone. And I'm not going to spend too much time talking about the obvious like I'm your parents, but the amount of content that is digestible at your fingertips, starting with Reddit and now progressing to the cancerous TikTok, makes phones absolute black holes of time. If I'm in a situation where I'm waiting for even 30 seconds, I'm pulling out my phone, and this, unfortunately, bleeds into my gaming. When a cutscene plays, I lose control of my character and I put down the controller, or I take my hands off the keyboard, just as I explained earlier. But when my hands are free, my brain perceives that I have downtime, and then I pick up my stupid iPhone like a Pavlovian dog hearing the bell for food. This basically ensures that I retain zero information from the cutscene, and it absolutely breaks my immersion by taking me to whatever wasteful app I open, even if I'm just replying to my friends. And is this my fault? Absolutely. I am a weak man, and I am easily coerced by media conglomerates into giving up my free time to stupid algorithms designed to increase my retention. But unfortunately, I am not alone. I've seen all my friends do this patented phone controller swap whenever a game presents downtime, and I see their immersion breaking in real time. It's kind of the point where in order to fully enjoy a game's story, I have to put my phone down on Do Not Disturb and just kind of huck it to the other side of my room. Is that pathetic? Yes, almost certainly. If I had even a smidge more resolve, I wouldn't have to do this, but the way modern games and phones are designed, it's kind of a necessary evil, and I've noticed my enjoyment increasing drastically once I picked up the habit of throwing my phone across the room whenever I play a game. Now, this next part might sound a little bit niche, but please bear with me through my anecdote because I'll tie it into how it plays into modern gaming as a whole. You see, the other side of this equation is a bit harder for me to admit. Ever since I made the swap to becoming a PC gamer, I've never once looked back, and I do truly believe that it's without a doubt the best all-around gaming experience, but one of the PC's best traits is also its Achilles heel. If you look really closely, maybe you put on glasses, you might notice that PCs can be used for activities other than gaming. You can use your computer to watch movies, do homework, browse the internet even. The possibilities are kind of endless. And this is all well and good, but it took a dark turn when I decided to invest in a second monitor. Now, PCs are incredible at multitasking, and buying a second monitor that allows you to keep two separate tasks open at the same time seems like the logical progression for improving your productivity even more. And it's absolutely led to some of my favorite moments in gaming as well, without a doubt. Playing a game that doesn't require your full attention on one monitor while watching a TV show on the other is basically what I assume hard drugs feel like in terms of how happy it makes my brain. There was a point where the endgame for my favorite game at the time, The Lord of the Rings Online, required you to go around and pick flowers to trade in for gear upgrades. And this is normally something that would cause me to open the game's forum and turn on caps lock, but I took this opportunity to watch all of Futurama on my second monitor. Now, this otherwise exceedingly boring portion of the game turned into one of my favorite gaming experiences, And when things are busy, I often find myself missing that tranquil month where I used to spend an hour every day picking flowers in Middle-earth while watching Fry and Bender explore the universe. And of course, I'm using PC as an example because it's probably the most egregious, but I've seen other people doing the same thing firsthand on other platforms. Putting their laptop next to them to watch a Twitch stream while they're playing Pokemon, listening to an EDM set while they're playing Forza. Gaming nowadays is often being supplemented by other forms of media as we all try harder and harder to block out the chance of a stray thought entering our minds. And this brings me right to the main point. In a world where more and more devices and more forms of media are all vying for our attention, it becomes increasingly important to keep players engaged in the game they're playing. And I realize how important downtime is to a good gaming experience, but having consistent, essential parts of the game and its story be locked behind these poorly executed cutscenes is a large part of the reason that I believe games are missing their magic. If anyone can tell me the story of one of the new Assassin's Creed games, I will bake you a tray of cookies. They have the most forgettable stories in the world because all the important details are locked behind sequences you watch rather than play. And it spreads to all elements of the game. Oftentimes half the satisfaction of beating a boss is knowing that I was getting revenge for my great-great-grandfather, but I'll usually miss this because it was just one line in a cutscene 30 minutes ago. But enough whining. I hope that by now you can see why I think this is such a problem in modern games, but let me explain my solution. Of course, this is just my humble opinion, so if you think I'm wrong and maybe you want to berate me in the comments, feel free to go right ahead. I mentioned earlier that some developers are remedying the cutscene problem already, and that was actually a genius part of foreshadowing for this part of the video. I know, pretty incredible stuff. The way they're remedying it is less incredible, but equally genius. They're taking out the cutscenes altogether, or at least limiting them to the absolutely necessary and best moments for their usage. They're also keeping them brief and consistent so people know they'll be rewarded for keeping their focus on the game for the next 15 seconds or so. But if cutscenes and forced dialogue sections are limited, how does a game tell its story? Earlier I said some games still do feel magical like they did when I was a kid. And let me tell you about the most recent example for me. In Elden Ring, cutscenes are limited only to the absolutely most important sections, and dialogue is rarely forced. If you're going to be locked into dialogue, it's usually because you are seeking out one of the few NPCs in the game in an effort to hear their tale. You're genuinely interested in speaking with them. By withholding the majority of the story and keeping this air of mystery, the game's able to earn these few cutscenes, and it made sure that these cutscenes that you do see are worthy of your time. But withholding a story isn't the answer. You're not going to make games better by limiting the cutscenes and thus limiting the narrative. Instead, Elden Ring uses environmental storytelling as its main narrative driver, and the result is a world that rewards you for immersion. Everywhere you go, there is a story told by the landscape, by the enemies, by the few townsfolk. Almost every ounce of the story is seen instead of heard. Show don't tell was like the first thing my middle school teachers told me about writing, so why is it so hard for game publishers to remember this cardinal fact? It also doesn't hurt that Elden Ring has some of the best world design and world building I've ever seen in a game, but there are plenty of games that could benefit from this intentional environmental storytelling. It was certainly a thing when I was a kid, even before graphics got better and more realistic. I know I was harping on Skyrim earlier, but it has some of the most incredible environmental storytelling I've ever seen, and that game came out 11 years ago, the first time. So often, these new titles have these groundbreaking, mouth-watering visuals that end up only being there to look good in the trailer so that pre-orders are more incentivized. Just like in the real world, beauty without substance ends up being ugly. So developers should really be more intentional with their environmental storytelling because it encourages immersion and it leads to a more life-filled, realistic, interesting, and engaging world, right? I mean, that sounds great, but don't let all these positive adjectives let you forget the simple fact that dialogue is really important to the narrative. If I didn't have Jarl Balgruuf spilling the tea to me, I wouldn't know a damn thing about what was going on in Skyrim, but does he really need to lock eyes with me like we're on a first date? Let me move my character. Give me something to do while you're telling me why I'm doing it. While I hate following people in games because developers never know how to match our speeds and it always feels like we're connected by a soggy pool noodle that's just slowing us both down, whenever a game has me running somewhere, seeing the world, and also conveniently having our characters talk, that is when I am the most engaged with the story. And I realize this is a technique that you literally employ on toddlers, like turning the spoon into a plane, but if you hide forced dialogue in a semi but not too engaging part of the story, like when you're running down a new path, I will eat that shit up like a slice of French toast. I know this sounds like a lot to go through, but there are so many ways that you can disguise narrative progression in this same vein, and combining this with an increased focus on environmental storytelling will result in games having a more engaging story, a more engaging world, and will lead to a more holistic and immersive experience overall. I promise you, you, if games start to employ these pillars of game design, they might start to feel magical again. But of course, the other end of the equation is on us as players. In a world where our attention span decreases by the second, focus on a game if you know it's worth your time. We play games to experience something new and to lose ourselves in an alternate world. So if you find yourself being guilty of going on your phone every cutscene as I am, huck that baby to the other side of the room. I mean, what's the worst thing that could happen? You open the phone and your girlfriend dumped you? So guys, I hope you enjoyed today's video. I have some new ones coming super soon, so make sure if you haven't already to go hit the notification bell, give it a ring. The best part of uploading a video is when I first go and there are hundreds of comments that I can immediately reply to. It's like the best part. I'll respond immediately. I'll give them love. So if you do hit the bell and you're able to be there when the videos come out, usually around noon, usually on a weekend, I'll be there. I'll be there hovering like an absolute hawk. And it's like the best way to see that all this effort that I put into these videos wasn't just for nothing. But either way, thank you guys so much for watching, and thank you so much for 60,000 subs. I can see 100K on the horizon, and I want that plaque more than anything. So I'm gonna work to get there, but I hope we're there soon. In the meantime, this has been Meraki. Thank you so much for watching. Bye-bye.